So I was actually doing a lot of research for writing my newsletters edition for this week. And as I was doing that, I realized that I was really trying to, or at least in some way, effectively leveraging the usefulness of how Rome research can basically add to my serendipity, creativity, and my knowledge bank over a period of time. And because a few of my friends have also started using Rome research, and they have actually asked me questions about how to use Rome research effectively, because it's actually intimidating to just get started with a blank slate and not know anything about the hidden capabilities of Rome. I thought that just taking you through the process of while I'm actually doing the research would be a much better idea rather than me doing it in post and showing how I was actually doing it or actually going about it. So I'm halfway through my research at this point. You'll see I'm basically reading an article by Mark Manson on creativity because it aligns with the concept that I talked about in my previous newsletters edition, which was on window openers versus door knockers. So really in this video, it'll be pretty raw. I'll just be taking you through how I'm actually reading the article and how I'm storing references, and basically in many ways you can say engineering serendipity. And just doing that, engineering serendipity, is the number one objective of using Rome and getting started with Rome research in a very effective way. And actually, before I delve deep, I'd also like to share a few more thoughts on how to get started with Rome and how to basically think about it. And the idea is that Rome research is a tool from which you can only derive value in the medium to the long term. Most likely and more often than not, it's impossible to derive any value from Rome in the short term simply because you don't have enough data to actually derive value from it in the short term. It's much like machine learning or any other algorithm. For it to work properly, for AI to function properly, you first have to show it enough examples and enough data, feed enough data in the model for it to understand what sort of patterns or what sort of trends it can predict in the future. Similarly, for Rome research and for leveraging its power, you first have to just trust the software and just feed in as much data and knowledge in a rather unreferenced and unhinged way so that you can then leverage it in the long term. And while doing this may actually seem daunting, it's not quite daunting because in the long term, you'll realize that you would have derived much more value out of Rome by doing this sort of unhinged note-taking process rather than trying to see what goes where, what node goes in what notebook, or what's the hierarchical structure of one particular idea or excerpt that you found and where does it go and so on and so forth. Because really, the idea of Rome is that our brains don't work in a linear hierarchical manner. Our brains work in an interconnected web of neurons kind of manner. So you're better off actually just using Rome to the best of its capability, trusting the process, trusting the software that it does the job, and just having a vague idea of what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing. And I know that sounds pretty abstract, so maybe the screen share that I'll just show you would help you in concretizing this entire process of note-taking and really, the way I like to see it, engineering serendipity, because that is the number one feature of Rome. So let's get right to it. So I am reading this article, 5 Boring Ways to Become More Creative, one of the best articles that I've read so far. And it's honestly not just an article about productivity, it's an article about so many things that I don't even know where to start and how to describe it in a better way. But really, you have to read the entire article by Mark Manson to really appreciate the usefulness of this entire concept. That how can you do boring things and yet be very creative? So over here, you would see that I have a bunch of ideas and things that I've stored in Rome research. And what I want you to actually notice is that I'm not quite paying attention to how I store ideas or references from this article. I just write something and I just try to see and evaluate whether that is something that is a common word that will strike me at a later date. So for example, in this particular excerpt, Mark mentions a few examples of Picasso, Mozart, and Mark Twain, and shows that how these great people became great was because the result of just producing more work and a significantly higher amount of low quality or medium quality work, that some of their works just stood out. So Mozart and Beethoven each composed more than 600 pieces of music. Picasso produced so many pieces that art scholars still can't even count them all, right? So what strikes me is that, all right, these are few examples which I can probably reference at a later date in one of my newsletters or writing posts, or even just for thinking purposes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new tag over here using Rome's bidirectional feature of hitting the double bracket twice and just typing in examples over here. And to show you what I have in examples and to actually show you that I did it for the first time, I'm just going to press shift click over here, and you will see that I have 3 linked references for examples. And I have examples over here, which is what you see over here. I have examples over here, which is about Ernest Hemingway. Now, if you look at this excerpt, right, Ernest Hemingway, he got his writing chops as a newspaper reporter in Kansas City before he left for the Italian front during World War I to be an ambulance driver. After the war, he was a foreign correspondent for several different news publications, which supported him while he wrote some of his most famous works on the side. Now, this particular piece from the article is stored in this node that I've created for myself, which is, if you're not a first-class genius, work hard. Genius is the tag that I just created, and it's an example. And it's an example of Ernest Hemingway, who's an author. So you can see that my brain is actually just firing up connections and just letting things loose, rather than thinking about how do I store this note or which notebook this note goes in, because that really isn't that important. What's important is that you are focused on your original goal of engineering serendipity, and that is why I just literally copy and paste this entire thing over here, and that's it. But another thing that strikes me is that I don't have a Mark Manson reference over here, so I'm just going to create Mark Manson right here, and that's all. That's it. And another thing in this particular node is Andy Warhol, right, who worked in the art department of a magazine and was a designer for a shoe manufacturer. So it was in these jobs that he experimented with many of the techniques that would later come to define his now famous design style. So even this is a cool example that fits in this category. Now, you might ask as to why am I just storing these examples in this particular category, right? If you're not a first-class genius, work hard. Like, where did that thought even come from? So now, to explore that, let me just click over here, and I'm going to click shift click over here as well to see that I have 2 linked references of this idea. And these 2 references are one which was today, which is what you see over here. So let's just take that out right now. And on November 21st, actually, I was watching this talk by Richard Hamming called You and Your Research. And he says that basically spend your time studying things that are relevant to your field. And he says something, and the thought that struck me at that particular moment was that if you're not a first-class genius, work hard. Now, this is not a pretty stable or a uniform thought. And what I mean by that is that it's not a consistent or a retrievable or an easily retrievable title of a note. And you would definitely not label a notebook by this tag. But the beauty of Rome Research lies, and this is where you start to leverage the capabilities of Rome Research, is when you have a specific keyword and typing in that keyword actually flashes up other thoughts. So when I had actually just pasted all of this over here, the thought that came to my mind was that, okay, these are examples of geniuses, and I want to tag this with geniuses. Now, the natural reaction is to create a tag of genius. But the moment I originally created this tag genius, I automatically saw this. And that is why not only did I create a new tag of genius, I also referenced and cross-referenced it with this tag, that if you're not a first-class genius, work hard. And so I basically created these tags, and now these tags are just going to be with me for a long amount of time. Now, it's also possible that going forward, I tag some things with genius and not with if you're not a first-class genius, work hard, and so on and so forth. But the reason I don't really care about that is because Roam's ability to filter and give you information that is valuable is what is also extremely, extremely valuable. So let's say if I forget, or if I just want to reference, or if I want to find out what is the stuff that Mark Manson has talked about in the context of geniuses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a query over here, and I'm going to write, give me all the stuff that Mark Manson has talked about on geniuses. The moment I do that, that's all that I have. But because I'm just filtering this, I also remember that this is also something that Mark Manson has talked about for geniuses. So I'm just going to tag that. And the moment I do that, I have another reference over here with all the examples of geniuses. Now, even as I do this, I want to tag these guys with their own little pages, because at some point I am going to reference them. And the moment I do that, this is where the beauty of Roam Research lies, right? The moment I tried to tag Mozart, I saw that there was already a tag existing. And that is when I get curious and I'm like, all right, what was this tag originally about? And I realized that there was a movie called Amadeus that I have to watch. And so the next time, whenever I'm, say, talking about Mozart in some context or the other, I will naturally reference just this and this. And just having that access is incredibly valuable for any amount of creative work. Now, as I speak about creativity, let me just show you what I have gathered on creativity from this article by Mark Manson, 5 Boring Ways to Become More Creative. So what I want to do is, let's say, search about creativity, right? So I'm just going to create this double bracket and I'm going to write creativity over here. The moment I write this, I see there are all these tags and I see creativity, real-time creativity, creativity is repeatable, we can practice creativity, process of creativity is actually boring but the outcome is creative, and this is something that wasn't quite linked to the Mark Manson article. And I see that a multi-potentialite is an individual with many interests and creative pursuits whose personality is not just defined by a profession. And now, in my mind, I can automatically link creativity with being a multi-potentialite, i.e. someone who has many interests. And while that sounds pretty basic and it's not useful in some way or the other, it is useful for the strict purposes of, say, in my context, of writing something that I find to be good work. And so just having this access, just having this serendipity across various notes in a very easy manner is something that is highly, highly valuable. So let's say I go to creativity and I just want to see what do I have on creativity, and I have 5 linked references. And I see that I read this book, A Whole New Mind, one time, and that was about creativity. Mark Manson, in fact, talks about this rant, this Pachelbel rant, and it's the canon in D. This guitarist actually plays canon in D and plays a bunch of rhythms and melodies that are on canon D and actually sings many songs, and that was a very fun video. So I wrote just to myself, this was honestly one of the most fun videos I've ever watched, and I absolutely loved it. Now, at some point in the future, the moment I actually search for something super fun, I will come across this. And now I get curious. It's basically a depth first search. I can just click on fun and just evaluate what are the fun things that I've done, or what are the fun sources or resources that I've come across, be it articles, videos, papers, or whatnot. And that is something that's extremely valuable. Another thing that I actually want to show you is how I store references, how I store papers, articles, videos, blogs, so on and so forth. It's actually a pretty structured process, in the sense that I know that the stuff that I store will follow a vague structure, and that structure is permanent. And because that structure is permanent, I don't care about storing it under an article or a video. I just want to tag it with something, and I know that if I have the right filters, I will be able to take out everything related to a particular topic. So the meta page that I have for storing, let's say, articles, videos, blog posts, etc., is reference. And in reference, I have everything related to all the videos, articles, blog posts that I've read so far, and be it excerpts, be it the blog posts themselves, I've just basically posted everything over here. And that is something that's extremely valuable in the medium to the long term. And over here as well, you can see how I have stored references of books, quote, articles, frameworks, insights, papers, questions, facts, later, which is to study later, or a link, which includes, any resource or any cool website that I come across. And in fact, over here, I should also include reference. Now you can clearly see that I did not have reference over here before, because I had actually forgotten about that page. But the good part about Roam is that because it is so functionally easy and simple to use, you can just go to this page anytime, which is resources. You can and just make an edit, and that is when your entire Roam research becomes even more robust, because now you're not missing anything, because you have captured everything in one place. So I think the principle to follow with Roam and how to get started with Roam is to just focus on the 80-20 rule. Just understand that 80% of the value that you derive from this tool will be from 20% of the content that resurfaces in front of you in an organic, serendipitous manner, in the right way, at the right time. And just understanding that and trusting the process and trusting that the job that Connor and team at Roam have done is absolutely fantastic, because they have invested a lot of time in how we think and how can we develop effective tools for thought, is the way to go about how can we leverage the entire power of Roam. Now, that said, now let's go ahead and dive into how am I actually using and leveraging this article to store references or sharpen my thinking in terms of creativity. So I'll actually go to November 24th, because that is where I was storing all these references. I don't want there to be too many disparate references. So we were talking about Charles Darwin. I stored this as a quote somewhere over here. Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. Every great idea I've had grew out of work itself. That's great. Creative people don't find time to be creative. They put in the time to be creative, which is what I did over here. I stored these examples. I stored this picture above. And yeah, I think this is something that really makes sense to me, right? To use a basketball analogy, these people scored the most points not because they couldn't miss, but because they took the most shots. So that really gets me thinking about this idea of quality versus quantity, which is something that I think I talked about in one of my previous videos about how to get started online. So let me see if I have something about quality. Well, I do. Quantity can act as quality, and see, that is how serendipity happens in Roam. And now I'm going to store this as a quote by Mark Manson. And don't worry, there's literally no difference between the hashtag and a double brackets. Both create pages, but the way I like to differentiate it for myself is that hashtag essentially just creates a peripheral node in your brain, whereas a double brackets create a more sort of structured and solidified node in your brain. And that is something that's an extremely valuable distinction for myself, because if I know that something is directly relevant to Mark Manson, I'm not concerned about whether it's a quote or not. That's secondary. I first want to know who actually said this, and then I want to know, oh, it's a quote, exactly. So that is how this process becomes extremely valuable. So the nature of history is, yes, that's right, do normal things. We talked about Ernest Hemingway. Now I've also realized that as Ernest Hemingway had a very basic job, this reminds me of Einstein and how Einstein also had a job at the patent office for many years before he made his discoveries in 1905. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross-reference. I'm literally going to write this and not worry about the structure at all. I'm going to say cross-reference this with Einstein, who also had a boring. All right, now I was about to write boring, but this actually flashed up. So I'm going to write this. I'm going to click enter on this, and I'm just going to store this as a hashtag because it's kind of related to that idea. But I'm still going to go ahead and create a tag of boring. So I'm going to say cross-reference this with Einstein, who also had a boring day. Do I have something with a job? No, I don't. But I'm still going to tag it with job application. And that is why this becomes incredibly useful over a period of time. And still, I'm going to tag it with job as well. So see, I didn't actually care about where this is going. I'm just worrying about how can I tag more stuff with more meaningful tags so that over a period of time, this compounds and I get a lot of value from Rome. Okay, so this quote is interesting by Picasso. And did I create a tag for Picasso? No, I didn't. So first I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to actually paste this excerpt in this format. Mark Manson article. I'm not going to care about whether it's an article or articles, because the entire idea of Rome is to just get stuff into Rome's database rather than worry about how it's being stored or where it's being stored, because that is not the job of the mind. The mind's job is just engineer serendipity so that you can leverage Rome at the right time in the right way. So it's an article, and this is a quote in a way. Do I have something for the excerpt? No, I can also actually label this with excellence. And is there something on inspiration? Yeah, there is inspiration. It's also related to creativity, so I'm just going to do that. And I have a few other tags of creativity, so I'm just going to go ahead and say real-time creativity. And yeah. And this is a quote as well. So let me just go ahead and say that this is a quote. That's it. Now this is something that's very nicely written, and I'm pretty sure that I have something about Steve Jobs. So I'm just gonna write Steve Jobs over here. I'm just gonna post this. And steel. Is there something on steel? No, but this is a creativity thing. And originality is overrated. So that also reminds me that I should have originality is overrated over here too. And then I'm also going to tag this from Mark Manson article. Right? And that's just a great way for me to not worry about where this goes, but trust the process and trust the software that it will resurface at the right time in the right way. This line particularly strikes me. Art shows a lot of similarities with undervalued stocks. So, do I have something about stocks? Well, I do. And, just for clarity, all of these things are actually related to my notes from Ashwath Damodharan's class on corporate finance, and I did a video on that as well. So you can see how this is just making me remind of, where were these tags even from? And do I have something on art? Well, I do have this. So that's all. This is something that's cool. I don't need to tag this with Mark Manson again. And yeah, that's pretty much the process of just getting started with Rome and trusting that in the medium to the long term, you will derive enough value from Rome for you to justify the rather high cost of Rome per month, but understand that Rome actually adds much more value than the cost that it has right now. So yeah, thank you for watching and let me know how you feel about it.